Welcome to Healing Generations, a podcast creating a dialogue uplifting the importance of healing, strengthening, and supporting our communities, and that addresses the disparities and inequities in communities of color. Healing Generations is brought to you by the Healing Generations Institute, a collaborative initiative of the National Compadres Network and the Brotherhood of Yelders. Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date on our new releases.
Buenas, this is Cisco Gallardo with the Healing Generations podcast, Yelder edition, brought to you by the National Compadres Network and the Brotherhood of Elders. I want to say what's up, my gente. It's been a minute, but I'm really happy to be back, and I just want to remind the folks, one, I appreciate you. If you're listening right now, if you've been a long-time listener, I just want to say I appreciate you. Keep your head up, do what you got to do, Sometimes it's about survival, but it's really, you want to really work towards how do you thrive? How do you have movement? How do you have these times in your life where you're building? That's what we need. We need to build our community in the best way we can. And with that, every time we start a podcast, we like to ask permission to the Cuatro Vientos, to the Four Directions, to our ancestors for permission to do what we're doing, having this very sacred conversation in a good way. And I want you to take a little time out of your day, whatever you're doing. If you're working, if you could take a minute and just kind of reflect as we go through the Four Directions in a good way, if you can. But I want you to close your eyes if you can. And I want you to think of that east direction. They say that's the direction of the men. So I want you to think of your grandfathers, your fathers, your tios, your hood tios. I want you to think of your homies, your friends. I want you to think of your sons, maybe your godsons. Maybe you have a lot of nephews, even the nephews in the community, I want you to think about all the things that they go through. All the beautiful medicine that our men folk bring to the table. And we also want to recognize some of the trauma too. We want to make things better for them. I want you to think about those people in your life. Maybe it's your partner. Maybe it's your little brother, But I want you to think about them as we're talking about healing and these different conversations. Just want you to take a little time. And then I want you to turn in your mind that left direction. As we're turning left to face that west direction, we want to think of our LGBTQ relatives and what they're going through right now. But first, we want to call upon the blessings that they bring to our community. The things that they face right now, they're under attack, just like a lot of our communities are. We want to remember them, support them in their time of need, Because they're with us. We are one community. We want to remember them in a good way. And as we face that west direction, we think of all the women in our life. Our grandmothers, our mothers, our tias, our sisters, our daughters, our granddaughters. Think of all our nieces, our community nieces, our hood tias. We want to think about all of them. All the blessings that they bring to our community, the nurturing ways. And we also want to think of maybe some trauma that they face, and make sure that we do our best to improve their lives. Because when they're doing better, we're doing better. So we want to think of our women folk in that way, the givers of life, the ones that connect us to a Mother Earth. We want to recognize them in a good way. And then I want you to make that left all the way around to that north direction, the direction of the ancestors, of our elders. I want you to think about all the elders in your life, A lot of times, elderly people, they're very lonely. People forget about them. Maybe they don't want to take them. It's hard for them to get around, but I want you to remember them in a good way, They fought for us. Sometimes they didn't even know our name. They didn't know we were coming yet, but they wanted to improve the world for us. So we want to take that time to think about them. And if you have, older parents or grandparents, go visit them. Or you have a tia who's up there in age, take her some tacos, take her some food, maybe a little bit of soup, nourish them. Listen to the stories, even if you heard it 10 times in a row, listen to them. Just give them a little bit of time. It's going to make a world of difference. And maybe you're at the store and an old person starts talking to you and starts telling you a big old story. Just give them a little bit of attention, in a good way. Maybe you're going to learn something. Just think of it that way. And then I want you to turn again, and it's that spectrum from the oldest all the way down to the youngest. We want to think of those babies that are not even born yet. They're coming. They're absorbing through their mother. They're absorbing the laughter, the sadness. They absorb it all. We want to think about them in a good way. We want to think about those newborns, the toddlers, the elementary school kids, the middle school kids. They're getting excited for that summertime, and the high school kids, all the way up into college, whatever they're doing, trade school, starting out doing a career, whatever they're doing. Truly, the young people are the future for us, but we have to teach them. They can't do it alone. They need us. They need our guidance. They need our love. They need our discipline. También, they need all of it. So I want you to think of that connection from the oldest to the youngest. Our struggle is intergenerational. It is not one direction or another. It's the whole thing, the whole spectrum of our people. And then I want you to put your hands in the sky and recognize that sun, that light. For me, what I was always taught, that sun is a reflection of hope. Even though you can't see it, it's still there. Every morning that sun comes around, and that sun provides vitamins, provides certain energies that help the plants grow. Without that, we couldn't live. We need that sun. We're tied to that sun. So that even if you don't believe in anything, that sun is important to us. We need it for everyday life, but it's also, again, that symbol of hope. Every day is a new day. You could start over. It might not feel like that sometimes. It might be tough, but as they say, this too will pass. My homie used to say that. His grandma used to tell him that when he was young. And he'd be struggling. His grandma knew when to tell him that, And then we want to touch Mother Earth. The beauty of Mother Earth. The ruggedness. Sometimes it's unforgiving. But most of the time, it just provides for us. Provides water, food, all the things that we need. So we have to do our best to take care of her in any way we can and recognize all the manifestations of Mother Earth. Coahuicle, Tonantzin, all the different ones, whatever, maybe in your language you have a different name, but recognize our mother in that way. And then in the center, I want you to put your hands in the center and think of creation. I'm not telling you what to believe or how you believe, but I want you to just recognize the power of life, the miracle of life, and how important it is, to be in awe of life and not to take it for granted, You could cruise through life on automatic, but you're missing out when you do that. You got to create experiences for yourself and those around you, your friends, your family, your kids, whoever your chosen family is. You also have that ability to create, So I want you to think about that. Think about that as we move forward and, think about the rest of your day, the rest of your month. I want good things for you, And of course, we want to recognize all our people right there that are struggling because of the political climate that's happening right now, But we have to be the warriors. We have to be the warriors that we know we are, however we can be, always maintain class and do the best you can. Palabra. Thank you for taking that little bit of time just to reflect on life, reflect on our teachings, reflect on all those things. But today we have a really good guest. I know I always say that, but all our guests are so good. I don't know. I don't think I've ever booked somebody and be like, oh man, I don't want to do that one. I've been trying to get our guests on for a while. It took a minute, but I'm glad that we kind of worked it out. And hey, sometimes these things work out the way they do. So with that, I want to invite Michelle in. Thank you, Michelle. How you doing?
Thank you, Cisco. Excited to be back. Really happy to be here. And so excited for the guest that we have today, Nicole. I will let her introduce herself, though. So, Nicole, could you please share a little bit about yourself, your family, your background, and your journey up to this point in life?
So first of all, I just want to thank Michelle and Cisco for having me. It's a great honor to be here with you all today. So a little bit about me. My name is Nicole Rojas. I was born and raised in East Los Angeles. I am third generation born here in Los Angeles. My family lineage comes from Sonora, Mexico. And as far as what I know, my tata was born in Rio Yaqui. Life definitely has a lot of twists and turns, but I spent about 25 years in social service work as of right now. And I worked with all kinds of different aspects of social work, from gang lifers, domestic violence. But during that time, I've also spent 25 years on the Red Road, right? I've been an activist, starting with Mecha, and then I've I haven't stopped growing and walking that road since. So just kind of a brief overview, right?
All right. Thank you for your answer, Nicole. I mean, there's so many questions I could ask you, but the question I want to ask you, what lessons have you learned, through your culture, through your family, through your life experience? I know you're on the Red Road. What did you just kind of always knew about it? But when did you really kind of really got on the road and started developing and understanding, well, what ceremonies do you like and how did you kind of fold it into your life in that way?
Funny enough, like when I was really small, my dad used to tell me, and not my mom, my dad, and used to say, well, you're Yaqui. And I was like, I had no clue or idea what that even meant, right? And he told me it's from my mother's side. And then I met a friend of his, and then he was Navajo. Goes, yeah, look at her nose, she's Yaqui. So I guess there's like something about a nose, right? And so with that, always that understanding was always in the back of my head as a kid, and then going, into high school. And then finally, like when my life was at like disarray, because it was my life up until that point had so many tragic things happen to me, that I went to, and it sounds so cliche, I went to East LA College and I took a Chicano studies course, and I met my, mentor, Elder Frank Gutierrez. And meeting Frank, rest in peace, set me on a whole trajectory of life that I never thought was possible. And I have not turned back since.
Well, what were some of the things that he was saying that really caught your attention? Because I know that feeling too. I tell people I went to the Escuela Tlatelolco, which was founded by Corky. And when I went there, Corky Gonzalez, and he was, just for people that don't know, he was kind of like one of the four horsemen. They used to say, he was one of the leaders within the Chicano movement. But the crusade, what differentiated the crusade from other parts of the movement, he was more militant, more like people would refer, like he was the Chicano Malcolm X in that way. They attacked the crusade in 1973, blew up half the building. They killed a person. His name is Luis Martinez. And then lots of things happened, and that's where he was at. So what was that thing that Frank was telling you about and educating you where it just clicked to you or clicked for you?
One, Frank had long hair, right? I was like, what's this hippie teacher doing here? And then I found out that he was Yaqui. And then, and from there, it was, I would wait every day. Like we'd have class once a week, right? And that class was like from 7 p.m. to 10 p.m. at night. And so right after class, a few of us would wait and so that we could walk him to his car so that we can continue to learn and get that knowledge. And I think spiritually, it just connected with me right away. And it wasn't any one particular thing he said. It was just everything he was like teaching us in that class, because it wasn't just a regular Chicano studies. He was teaching us, the difference between tradition and Western, ways. And that made a huge, like, that just opened up just everything in me.
Yeah, I know that feeling, getting just kind of awoken, and you just become a sponge, trying to absorb it all and doing all that. So when you were getting, how did you connect it to like doing your own work about yourself? Like, how did you deal with life? Those traumas that everyone deals with, utilizing your culture in that way.
Well, at that point in time, because I was still like very young, I think I was like 23, just from turn 23, maybe, 22, 23 years old. And I was partying, I was drinking Southern Comfort and all this great stuff. And I wasn't living the kind of life I felt like was good, right? And so at a certain point, Frank invited us to Sweat Lodge. And when I went to Lodge for the very first time, I could not believe the profound connection that it gave me. Even to this day, like, my prayers were answered, because I prayed that day. I said, if this is my walk, if this is really truly my way I'm supposed to go, take away the alcohol, right? And after that Lodge, I was sober for 8 years, like completely sober for 8 years. So I guess to me, that was a sign. And it just went away from one day to the next. And so I knew I was on the right path.
That's beautiful.
Nicole, are there any other lessons that you learned from others around you, aside from Frank, maybe from your family, your culture, that also helped you in your healing, your development?
Well, definitely a lot of my trauma came from my family, right?
Yeah.
But I think other people, like in the community, it was as I grew and I became stronger. I went from being right away from just a regular person trying to join Mecha to the chair of Mecha, right? And I remember going, at the time, Jimmy had invited us to He-Man Stark prison, right? And he's all, come talk to the youth. And I was like, okay. And so when we came as Mecha there, and there was nothing but a bunch of youngsters, they were just like, well, how does it feel as a woman to be chair of Mecha? And I go, cool, because right here is my co-chair, and that's a guy. My secretary is a guy. So to know that our men believe in us is beautiful, and they were like, yay, they were excited to hear that there was a strength in a woman that they hadn't seen, right? And so prior to that, I was actually doing a lot of, like, I worked with the YMCA a lot, and that connection that I had with kids and helping kids and just participating in that connection. So those kind of things happen like dual at the same time, that it led me into social work, the work I do, So tapping into what I found connection with and my cultural aspect of who I was, my ceremony, it just navigated to me where I'm at today.
Beautiful.
That's beautiful. I remember when I was, first going to sweats and things like that, like really hardcore, just kind of, at the time, to be honest, I was just building. It felt good. I knew this was right for me. But, it took me a while to learn, how I'm utilizing this, not just the good feeling, but how am I putting it to work, right? Because I would see people going to this different ceremonies and they would beat themselves up, right? They were throwing up, doing all kinds of stuff. And I learned, one of my elders told me, he said, you know what they're going through, they can't let go. So they're stuck spiritually and they're dealing with the consequences of that. And he said, one thing you want to do is do your best not to be stuck. Like, ask for the understanding to understand what's happening to you. How do you learn from it? And then how do you move on? You know, how do you take your teachings and move on and build on those teachings, not just get stuck in feeling bad and bad for yourself? Because I recognize a lot of our people, they go looking for something, but instead of supporting the prayer, they go through their own little thing on the side. And it's like, you're going to get a lot of blessings if you just participate. And through somebody else's healing, you're going to get healing too. You know, you're going to find healing there. And it took me a while. It wasn't like I just learned automatically, but I heard it and I wanted it. And it just took me a while to understand it, you know. And luckily, my homies at the time, and they're still my homies, you know, we kind of went through all this together. We talked about it. Like, we didn't quite understand everything, but we talked about it. And as we were compadres, helping each other raise kids and go through marriages and breakups and all this stuff in life, you know, we realized that it didn't have to be either or. Like, these tools are not just when you're doing good, but they're even when you're hard. That's when you need them most. Mm-hmm. Because I think a residue of Christianity in our communities, again, I'm not talking bad against all Christianity or anything like that. I'm just saying, for me, I always saw people, they would like judge their life and judge certain things. And there's the residue of, am I worthy of this? Like, God is so precious, I'm tainted and therefore I'm no good. But you see in nature, the beauty comes in so many different ways. You know, it shows up many different ways, you know, from the insects to different animals, different people, different personalities. That beauty, as the Navajo brothers say, this is the beauty way. You know, finding that beauty in everything is important. You know, it kind of goes with that. So I could totally see how, you know, that's definitely healing. You know, it's definitely a healing way in that way.
You know, when you brought up the religion, right? Like, I think for me, because I wasn't raised in any form of non-practicing Catholics, right? Where you know, you're just Catholic, okay, by living in East LA, you're Catholic. So I think because of that, I never held on to any shame. If anything, the minute that I connected to the red road, I was just like, all right, let's do this. I was tired of the suffering prior that led everything that led up to that. So I was really ready to let go and shine in that way. What I will say is that it's people may think that, oh, you just find it and it magically turns beautiful, but it's hard work. Anything that you do to uplift yourself or to move forward is a lot of work, you know? And I think that's where, when you learn how to put in work in yourself from the gate, it just transforms, even if when you don't want it to.
Yeah, that's a very important part, because a lot of times, you know, it is beautiful, but it is work. Everything takes work. And sometimes different medicines will put you on your butt. They're going to teach you. And it's not always what you think. You know, it's tough sometimes. But there's beauty in overcoming adversity, you know, overcoming certain things. Even if it's, you know, a ceremony that happens overnight or a ceremony that happens 4 or 5 days, there's a process. You're changed, forever changed. Just like there's a saying that you never cross a river the same way again. Once you do it, what was going on that day, the flows, that's it. It's unique. Even if you cross that same river, it will be different. And that's how it is, you know, in life. Things are not always the same. You have to be prepared. And sometimes it's tough, you know. It took me a minute. For me, I fell in love. I went to a ceremony in Mexico, in Michoacan, in the mountains. You know, we were over there, and it was peace and dignity, and it was a beautiful thing, you know. And then, but what really got me was, it was a tough ceremony. It was rough. But I saw little kids in there singing, just some straight up campesinos working. They're working with us. We're kind of just hanging out together, and they're tripping out on us, and we're kind of tripping out on them. But then they were just so into the moment. And for me, it altered my way I looked at it. You know, sometimes in the early years, not that I felt it was performative or anything, I just felt like, especially because there was, a lot of machistas, different people. So not everybody was super committed to it, but we were going and learning together. But when I went to Mexico that time, I really saw it. I saw what it meant to our people, being around some of the ancient ways, seeing all the different tribes from Peace and Dignity, all the different gente, all the different staffs. It just changed my life in that way. You know what I mean? So I'm glad that however you found it, that you had enough awareness to accept it in a good way and kind of move with it and grow with it. Because again, everyone's journey's differently. But, if you're interested in something like that, I just want to just start simple, just start simple. How would you suggest people, like if people were interested, you work with a lot of different people. I know in your time you've ran circles for women, all these different kinds of things, the little I do know about you. How did it come about that you were going to be a helper in that way?
When I started off with Mecha, I really thought to myself, like, how beautiful fighting for our people, right? But I realized, like, if we brought politics into ceremony, we're not going to do what's very much needed, which is spiritual healing, right? So that healing component just kind of flourished. And then I really felt like, how can I bring this to our people, our young people? So for about 15 years, I worked with the gang intervention, and I mainly worked with our young men. And what I noticed is that so many of our young people, and maybe because when I walked onto that platform, I was already older. I wasn't 18, shiny coming out of my house. I was already had been on my own and doing the work, living life actually. And so when I started working with the young people, I was like, they don't even know who they are. Right. And they wear Zapata shirts and they don't even know who Zapata is, or that he spoke Nahuatl, or what that even means, or, when they say Chicano, what does that mean? And so I took time to really teach them something. And I found that in just teaching them something, they felt smarter, and they felt like, oh, I can see that. And they liked what they were hearing. And they connected it, they connected to it. And, from there it grew. I understood that. So then I take them on long camping trips, up to the mountains, and they had no cell phone access up there. And, we had them run around like wild boys and, teaching them about, yeah. And teaching them about the moon and me being the only female again, for them. And I was at their level. I didn't come in thinking that, I was better than them, because we're all from the same community, then, and I think that really helped them see themselves as just as important in the work as what I was doing.
That's beautiful work that you were able to do through Mecha. And I know that you mentioned previously that all of that helped you find your passion and transitioning into being a social worker. What is it that you are doing now these days? How is it that you are continuing to build on those lessons that you learned and gained from your professors, from your culture, and that you had already poured onto other young folks? How is it that you do that now?
I think we all lead by example in the way we live our life, right? So not that it makes us better human beings, but to accomplish things. So I want to say last Saturday, I got my master's in cultural family studies for my gente, because that's how I use it. I don't use it to put a degree up on my wall and be I do it because the more I learn, and to show them the walk that they can accomplish whatever big dreams that they have, that if I can do it, so can they, right? And so right now, with that, I'm working at East LA Women's Center, right? And I'm actually starting they have a program, it's a restorative justice, and it's working with men. Here I am again, finding myself working with the men population. And I want to say I gravitate towards that because I believe in holding people accountable to their healing. Whether it's a man or a woman, I can really, there's not the issue for me. The issue is that like you as a human being are ready to change some of the things in your life and open some doors and deal with some issues, right? But I'm also, besides that, I'm in the process of creating the first Native Indigenous Spiritual Cultural Center in Los Angeles.
Nice.
So, and I'm doing this for the young people, not the old people. So I believe like our young people need a place to pray too, and they can't always head up to Tule River or down, like, if they don't know, then, it's a little tricky when we talk about ceremony and things like that, and it could be really far off. So I wanted to create something to be able for our young people to come like down the street, they could catch a bus there, and
Yeah.
at the same time feel safe with the adults that they're with.
Yeah, that's beautiful. When you shared that vision with me too, I was like, wow, that's a beautiful, especially in a place like Los Angeles where city after city after city, it's a concrete jungle, but we still sometimes forget this ground is sacred. The Tongva people, all the different people within this area, they lived off this land and they're still here. Some people forget that, and that's beautiful. And I want to give a shout out to the East LA Women's Center, man. They do a lot of good work. I know Barbara and Brother Ozzy does some work there with the fathers. He has a fatherhood group, and they do it in English and Spanish. And then the work that you're doing there with Damaris and the whole work there, I think it's beautiful. A lot of times in our community, there's trauma in intimate partner violence. And it doesn't even have to be intimate partner violence. A lot of people don't realize domestic violence happens it can happen between parents and their kids. It could happen between siblings. There's a lot of different ways that it shows up. And it's one of those things that we don't always talk about, In today's world where everything's fast, like TikTok and short form videos and the one thing that for me, ceremony always taught me was to be patient. That things will happen, especially when you got an older woman praying or an older man, but I find it's more the women. When they're praying thorough, the way they always told me is, I have this opportunity, a captured moment. I have to include as much as I possibly can. Having the patience to allow her to hold us in a good way, because we're not used to that. It took me many years to develop that patience, and really that's what you're doing with these groups. I know Brother Armando's involved, Armando Lawrence, so I want to encourage people, go to their Instagram. I don't have it right now, but it'll be in the show notes and, the website, and get involved. Even if, it's not for you, but it might be for your primo, your cousins. It might be for somebody. And, but learn more about the East LA Women's Center. And they also host the East LA Men's Group that we have there. It's just a beautiful group. I was there last night, and it's needed. It's needed. There needs to be circles everywhere across the city for men and women and all those in between. I think it's that important. So I want to appreciate you for that.
Thank you. I'm like, I know a lot of people, like a lot of men probably say, oh, it's East LA Women's Center. But, we come to a realization that we need just as much resources for just men, right? To be able to heal and get in there. So our, between me and Damaris is more working with the women, and I'm working more with the men. And what we're doing is for, 12 weeks, we're holding a restorative circle, right? And this circle begins with anybody who would like to join. And again, it's not just about like, oh, you need to change. Like, there's things that happen to them, right? That caused the blockage, the
trauma,
the trauma. So they need to acknowledge that maybe they're continuing the cycle, or they have continued the cycle, and how to reverse it, right? Or how we can move forward healthier. And then the second component to that is that if they have a partner who they've had children with, but they're co-parenting because of you and the partner, you guys have done harm to each other, well, we try to work with them both so that they can co-parent cohesively and, better for the children if they are both willing to do that. If they're not, then even working with one, because eventually people pop into other relationships. They may have other children. So moving forward, let's not repeat the cycle. So I think it's a great program.
I really appreciate that your clarification too, because it ain't if you're the perpetrator or it's no judgment. It's really if sometimes trauma affects us differently. Some it's more emotional, some it's more physical. And sometimes we never learned a healthy conflict style. We don't know how to have, sometimes I struggle with that. How do you have a discussion that's really tough without getting angry? You carry your trauma sometimes with you, and you gotta take a little time to put it down, and that goes both ways. And sometimes a lot of the stuff I hear from men in my groups is this is all I know. I don't want to be like this, but this is what I know. And it takes a while. It really does. It takes a while. And I tell them again, it's not perfection, it's progress. You know what I mean? That's a beautiful experience. So I just want to thank you for doing that work. It's important. I know there's always time to recognize, again, the kind of, a lot of the traumas that people face start at home. The first violence I ever seen was at my house. I didn't see it on the street or the calle. I seen it right there. And I think we have to acknowledge, the good and bad of our communities and our familia too, We don't get a book when we're a kid. Hey, this is what your life's going to be like. Follow it. And, no AI is going to teach you how to live. That's life experience in that way, so thank you again.
I think one of the biggest things that I always try to show is that when we talk about harm done to children, we say children, we don't say boys, we don't say girls, we say children. Yes. And in that, boys have been harmed in the same way, but because they grow bigger and, and they're taught differently than women, right? So then right away they become the bad person in that process. But once upon a time, they were little Manuel, and he got, harmed in some kind of way, just like, so did, our little selves, So I like for people to remember their child, not just if they were a boy or a girl, because I think traditionally a lot of tribes, a lot of nations, you didn't really look at them from that perspective until they were like coming of age, because when they're growing up, they all just grow out their hair long, running around, doing what kids do. And we didn't really acknowledge, it's like, oh, well, you're a girl, so you have to do this, and you're a boy, you have to do this, Mm-hmm. It wasn't until their coming of age ceremonies that they took those roles. So I try to remind everyone that their child was hurt.
Yes, that's important. And, to be 100%, when we lived in traditional communities, they were somewhat isolated in a ways. There was mixing of the gente, but it happened on various levels. Today, we're super condensed. We live condensed lives. A lot of people live in urban areas, and our experiences are different. And because the world moves so much faster, we're dealing with trauma that maybe our ancestors didn't have to deal with, and we're trying to figure it out. And it's one of those things, like, honestly, I feel really good about where our people are as far as like our consciousness and our understanding and evaluating, education and therapy in different ways. I always like to push Native therapists and Native people to say, okay, well, what makes what you're doing Native? Is it because you have sage in your desk or you have a picture of somebody on your wall? Like, how are you incorporating these ways in these institutions? Because for me, it was always refreshing. And when I was a youngster, I went to a place called Servicios de la Raza. It's a human services agency, but they were all gente. And the atmosphere, the whole thing, I didn't feel like I was like othered in any way. I was a part of that community and they made me feel welcome. So I know the beauty in that. But anyway, Michelle, what experience, even your life, getting, going to college and learning about your culture in various ways. What was that turning point for you?
For me, I think it was much of my experience in high school that gave me like armor before I took off into undergrad. I went to school out in the East Coast, and I was one of the very few Mexican Americans, if you will, particularly from the West Coast. And we flow differently than the folks out in the East Coast. And so my first year, I remember feeling very misunderstood. And then afterwards, kind of like challenged with losing sight of my roots, of my culture, with trying to like fit in or assimilating to the Latino culture over there, right? And how the nuances were so different than over here. But I didn't get to experience Mecha in undergrad like I would have, because that didn't exist over there. And what I do remember being very pivotal for me is much of what I learned about Chicanismo and my identity was on my own. But my senior year, by pure coincidence, I had a teacher whom I cannot remember their name, but I remember they were the baseball coach, and they kind of became my history teacher, if you will, by accident. And they had the liberty to cater the curriculum however they wanted. And so they kind of did like an introduction to Chicano studies for us. And I'll say that many of the folks who took that class with me went on to be very admirable activists in their schools when they moved on to undergrad. And it gave us certainty about who we were before taking off into the real world on our own, right? And I always went back to those teachings and those lessons to reroot myself during those times that I felt a little lost in undergrad. When I came back to California, it was through my students, one particular one, that I reconnected to the ancestral teachings and felt comfortable with having the conversations with more students, and that being like also part of my professional world, right? Learning that it didn't have to be separate, that the two could merge. So I learned those lessons from my students once I became older, and when I became an educator, and it's what helped me feel comfortable and empowered to continue with those conversations and those teachings, those lessons within in school.
That's important. I want to thank you, because I want the audience, to understand everybody comes at this differently. You're awakening, and so just be patient with yourself. Find something that works for you. But the main thing is you have to integrate it into your life, and that takes a little time, and it takes a lot of energy and things like that. But Nicole, I want to switch back to your vision that you're having of building this spiritual site, or ceremonial site, I guess would be the right term. But what's your vision? And then how could people support you if there's a way to support you? And, where you at in the process?
So in the process, I'm like, we got our board and we're right in the beginning. And the prayer here is that we'd have like 3 components, right, to this spiritual center. One would be ceremonial, which, I know is going to be tricky. I don't have all the answers just yet, so be patient with me. But the second part is a building. And in this building, I want to create a museum of history, specifically on the missions and the Tongva and the Chicanos. Because there's certain, like, we are still focused on like Toporina or other, but there's people today people like Vera Rocha and Cindy Alvitre and Chief Anthony Morales, that if it wasn't for them continuing the lineage, they're still here and they're still doing the work. There's a lot of people still doing the work, right? And like people like Tata Quashle, who was a very important part of our Chicano community, Frank Gutierrez, Uncle Tony, like all these people. So there's a lot of history that still needs to be written, that our younger people need to see that, they're not in the past. They're still present and doing the work. And in there, I want us to hold conferences as well as that. And so many other things I want to go on in that building. And then the other component is like an area of space for events. I feel like we're constantly like begging the parks and recs or having to rent out buildings for like crazy amounts of money just to have an event that, we're trying to do right by the community. So if it's a free event for the community, why would we charge, right? And then there's this cool component I want to have. Like, I want to build like 5 yurts on the grounds where elders can stay, come in from other places. Because, hosting an elder
Mm-hmm.
takes a lot of work. So, like, if
Yeah,
they have
it
a
does.
place,
Yeah.
yeah, and they have a beautiful place with plants and everything, they can pray there and give ceremony there and stay there on site. So, you know, um, there's just a lot that is in that, just even in that prayer.
Well, that's beautiful. Like however people can help, keep your eyes and ears open. And when you see opportunities, don't hesitate because visions, the thing about bringing it, I'm lucky that I've seen things and been a part of things that came together. And some people can't say that, right? They might have built individual goals, but I've been a part of some community goals. So I know it's possible. I have 100% faith in you, that you're going to pull it together and the community is going to grow. Cause I feel it's that time. There's so
Yeah.
many different ways of doing this. And two, that I love that you're centering the youth because the youth, they might bring a different twist, in the future. And as elders, that's part of our Yelders anyway, being young elders in our ways, in between. How do we create opportunity for that? You know what I mean? Because I have to admit, I'm a little stuck in my ways sometimes, and it's hard for me to do things differently because we get used to certain things, and I know my uncles and aunties before me, they got stuck in their ways, we kind of pushed the boundaries on them and I expect the same. I expect the young people to push on us slightly to say, hey, we want this, this is our vision too. And that's the beautiful thing to watch it build. You know what I mean?
So one of the things I'm doing is I want to have a board of elders, right? And on
Mm,
top of that, I want a board of youth. Because I'm
mm.
not trying to do this for the rest of my life. Like, I want to, you know
Yeah.
what I'm saying? Eventually, I just want to enjoy life and sit there and look at the fruits of my labor, right? So I want to also create like a young board that will continue the work so that the rest of us, now that we've planted that main part of it, that they can then take it over. Because I'm not trying to build it to hold on to it. It has to go on. And, the biggest thing about this for me is that I'm not trying to ask the government to support this vision, honestly.
Mm,
So if they go to the website, which is indigenousculturalfoundation.org, I believe that everybody who calls themselves Chicano, indigenous, native, whatever it is, if they would put $5 in that bank account, we could raise the money ourselves. So it's for the people, by the people. I'm tired of waiting for the government to supply anything for us. I know we can do it and we have the means to do it. So as we get back this land back, that we can create something for everyone, not just for one group of people. So I would love to see my gente, far and wide, cross continents, come and support this vision, this prayer.
yeah, that's all. That's really important to, we have to support efforts like this, especially because look at the Young Lords. They didn't get grants, right? The Black Panthers, they didn't get grants. The Crusade for Justice, they had a whole building. Families donated all that money. Families sold their houses and they gave the money to the cause. Some of them, unfortunately, some of them got their money back, some didn't, but they got something. And sometimes that's the gamble of the dream, but if we don't put it in motion, we'll never find out. It will be stuck somewhere in a thought, but it won't happen. So I appreciate that. I really do. Just having the vision is a big part of it, getting that and getting people excited about what could be is definitely how things come about.
I totally agree. I'm excited about it. I have 5 members on the board so far. One is Tino. If anybody knows Quinto Sol, he did, some of the rapping for Quinto Sol, but now he does gang intervention for Saya.
Mm.
I have Yout, Aslan Underground, also doing, clinical work in helping our people. And I have Kanahus, a sister from Canada. She's Sukwatmuk. She's a land defender. She's known for her work throughout the community, and throughout the world, actually. And then I have my sister Karina, who is helping and coming into this in a different way. But, all of us there to like start to plant that. And what we're hoping soon is to bring some of our elders to pray over the land and like to start this off in a good way.
That's beautiful.
I recognize so many of the names, and I love to see the collaboration, the community that's bringing this together. The youth who get connected to your cultural space are just going to be so fortunate and so blessed to learn from all those folks. If there were other people in the community who wanted to get involved with your work, how could they connect with you? How could they learn more? And if there are any other orgs that you want to shout out, feel free to do that too.
Right now, Indigenous Cultural Foundation is barely starting. So our website still needs work, but I'm working on it slowly but surely. But you definitely can go in there and go check that out. I do have my Instagram as well, which is still Indigenous Cultural Foundation, because I myself am a practitioner of holding spaces for healing. I talk a lot about that component. I haven't really talked about the cultural foundation too much because with good things also come bad, right? So I'm trying to do the work before people may come up against that component of it, right?
Yeah.
So definitely I would love people to like check out the website. Like I said, still in progress. So, but they can definitely contribute. And actually we talked about the Farsa July being our first like fundraiser, our first fundraiser.
Oh, nice.
Mm-hmm.
In Boyle Heights this year at Casa Mexicano.
Yeah, I like that, the idea, all the things you're doing. I'm a part of, my wife's a part of this danza group, and they have a ceremony at one of the rec centers, and things change. Like, you have to be out at 12 o'clock. They don't understand that these ceremonies take time, and they make it so hard to utilize the public spaces in our community, and it's been historically, they were there when it was not even known, but now it's a little gentrified and people want to go there, and it looks nice, but it's not cool if the community that doesn't live in Lincoln Heights is not the one enjoying it so much. You know what I mean? And that's important. We need to reclaim our spaces and find a way to not only reconnect with them, but to build, building it, the murals, all the. Yeah, I grew up like that. My neighborhood had so many beautiful murals too. There was this Northside Community Center when I was a kid. They had such beautiful murals in that building. I remember when the church took it over. They bought the building, or somehow they became owners of the space, and they painted over every mural. And it really, really broke my heart. I remember just being a kid and everyone just standing outside, just like in total disbelief, because you never thought that would happen, and here it's happening, But, that's how things come about. At the end of the day, it made us build other things, So I'm looking forward to that. So as we're wrapping things up, I think there's a lot of different things, and teachings and different things. If you were to meet somebody who is young or even young in the ways, and they want to get involved with, or they just want to start their journey, what would your be advice about how to just learn a little bit about the culture, the different ways? Because you could get involved. Some people get involved in danza, some people get involved sweat lodges, some people get involved in other ways. Maybe they understand and have their own family connection to their pueblos, and they start learning, going over there, spend time with elders. If you have that luxury, not all of us have that, but it's beautiful if you do. What would be your advice for somebody who's looking to do that? Because I think a lot of times what our people face is it really mine? Do I deserve it? Am I sacred enough?
The first thing is that they have to understand that being Mexican is a nationality and not a cultural identity, right? Mm. And once you're open to a cultural identity, then you can say, okay, then that's something I want to learn, right? And you just mentioned it, like there are various danza groups at every park that you can get involved with. I know that there is a Nawa class happening every Wednesday going into Highland Park. It's like a little park right there. But like if they can do that, or if they're like, I know Mesli Projects is very involved, and I know they have a drum circle once a month in the state park. And they also have men's circles as well there at Mesli Projects. And we're trying to build in East LA more trainings, like let's shout out to the Compadres Network that showed up to our cultural training about 2 months ago. And trained a bunch of facilitators in circle keeping. And so there's many ways to like even start listening to the, like this podcast, and these uncles and these mentors are there, for conversation. Armando loves to tell stories. Maybe we need to get him, let him tell stories, So there's ways, to definitely get involved. And if you don't know how, there's the Instagram, reach out, send a message like, hey, I want to get more involved. Nicole, like, let me know. And depending on where you live and where you're at, like East LA, like I can tell you, right? But definitely look at all the Native Indigenous posts and how you can get involved. But there's a lot of things going on, more than we think.
Oh, yeah. I remember the first time I went for a ceremony in the Bronx. This guy invited me to take care of a ceremony over there. I didn't know what to expect, right? We're right in the middle of this kind of bombed out area. It was all trashed out, and the community turned it into a park called Brook Park. And they put a little sweat on it, and we actually had a TV ceremony right there in the middle of, right now in the South Bronx. It was really amazing, to be honest. I was like tripping out. And there was gente from all over, from Mexico, Dominican Republic, homies from El Salvador, Guatemala. They created their own community. And it was beautiful to see that and be a part of it. And, even though I didn't grow up over here in California, in the Los Angeles area, I grew up in Denver. And Denver has its own indigenous connections, mostly to Lakotas, a lot of different Dene, Arapahoes, Utes. And we built a really strong community together. I think in a lot of good ways. But I know it's everywhere, all up and down the state, all the way in Portland. And my homie, he married he's from Mexico City, but he married a Cree girl from Canada. And he'd go over there and he learned a lot of their traditions and this and that. And I mean, our gente, and this is the truth. That's what I learned about peace and dignity years ago, all the way back in 92, that we had connections. There was pathways between our people. So wherever you can find a place, just grow with it. Go along with it. But remember, be a good student.
Yes.
You don't have to be a maestro. You don't have to be the teacher. Just listen and try to learn, and try to really understand it before they say walk before you run. I know when you're young, you get excited and you start, I've seen guys show up or women show up in a full traje and they have only been to 2 practices, They show up in the whole thing. When I was young, that'd be me too, I'm sure of it, I'm sure my uncles are probably, if they were listening, they'd be like, yeah, like you did. But that's how you learn. That's how you learn.
One of the beautiful things I've ever heard is that we have 2 ears and 1 mouth. You know what I mean? And the ears are for us to listen. And sometimes, even when we think we know it all, sometimes there's something new for us to learn. So why is it being repeated to you? Right? So I've learned to, even after 25 years, to still crawl on this road. Because what we've learned is but a speck. Because when you actually go, like I'm lucky enough that I'm going to Mexico City again in October for Dia de los Muertos, but I'm going to drive 4 hours to Michoacan to Pátzcuaro and go experience the Dia de los Muertos there, right? And they do it more traditional. And the fact that they're willing to still show you and bring you in is another way I learned to connect, right? Like we don't necessarily, if we have the means to travel, we should do that and open ourselves up.
I know what changed me. I was in a little mountain town called Yorocostio, Michoacan, way up in the mountains. We were camping and I don't know, for some reason I thought camping would be different in Mexico, but we had all the same stuff. It was kind of cool, except for it was more communal, of course. They took care of us in a different way and that kind of thing. But it really changed my life. And I also want to encourage people, and I want you to understand too, even in our sacred spaces, there's still trauma. And just go in there with your eyes wide open, to that. Protect yourself, both the young women and young men, do your best to listen, but, don't fall for everything, just peep it out and learn. I really think that's important because some people will go all in and they over trust a little bit. And it's always a rude awakening, even when you're in a very sacred space. You realize humans, we have flaws, and again, it's not about perfection, it's about progress. And even some of our elders are still healing themselves, and we got to be patient with that in a good way. So I appreciate your sharing your story, your vision with us, and like I told you before, any help that you would need from us, let me know. I would love to help out. Ever since I've been there, I've been trying to build a community and a sweat lodge and all that kind of stuff. I have access to one and, building a community, but I always been one of those dudes. I don't want to be a sheep herder. I want to walk with people. I'm not trying to be the main vato. I don't have to be that dude. I just want to do that. That's a good thing for all our people to understand is, if you have to step up to be a leader, please do so, but if you can build a consensus and an organization and a movement, then do that, if that's what you can do. So I want to close out with giving Michelle an opportunity to, any last thoughts, any last words that you want to share with the gente.
Thank you. I just really wanted to thank you, Nicole, for making the time to be even in a virtual space with us and sharing your projects with us. I'm so looking forward to seeing your projects come to fruition and seeing your cultural center flourish and being part of that community as well. So thank you for everything that you do and that you continue to do for the community and for our gente here.
Thank you both for having me on board here and to be able to speak on that. I'll be honest, a lot of times women aren't really given the space. Everyone wants to talk to the man, right? So it feels good when, we acknowledge our women and we hold space for all of us because I think we all have something to contribute. And thank you for that, both of you.
All right, thank you. I just want to remind the gente, if you want to give us some feedback, email us. Please be gentle, but we're cool for the conversation, So if you want to share it, you could share it off Apple, Amazon Music, Spotify, YouTube, all the places. Any place you could get a podcast, we're right there. And I want to remind you, if you're listening on one of those formats, you subscribe to it. So every time there's a new episode, the new episode comes to you. So all you got to do is listen. You know what I mean? Even though podcasting has been around for a long time, still people don't understand how it works, And, but if you get the hang of it, share it. You know what I mean? I know people who've used some of our podcasts as teaching aids, assignments for Chicano studies classes all around, however you find us, And we enjoy the conversation. Maybe you know a guest. Maybe you have a good tia, a good tío, or maybe some young people. Do you guys want to tell a story about healing? We're here for it. You know what I mean? I just want to remind that again, this is the Healing Generations podcast brought to you by the National Compadres Network and the Brotherhood of Elders.
For more information about Healing Generations and the Healing Generations Institute, visit nationalcompadresnetwork.org and be sure to subscribe to stay up to date with our new releases.